Hey, what's up, everybody? You ever think about the ways in which we greet each other? It's actually kind of weird, right? A handshake or a hug or the more popular, what's up?
Hey Cain, check your phone. 1999 called. They want their joke back.
I'm surprised you even got that joke. That's from like way back. Anyways, there's a bunch of different ways that we tend to greet each other, and yet none of them necessarily have a lot of meaning as to why we do it. In the ancient Roman Empire, they would often greet each other like this, by throwing a fist across their chest and saying strength and honor. I got chills just thinking about it. Isn't that just awesome? Not only is it like something cool to say that you would see in movies, it also has meaning for who the Romans were. See, the Roman nation was founded on specific virtues and values such as strength, courage, duty, and honor. And it creates one of the most successful empires the world has ever seen. And at its core is strength and honor. Let's talk about that and more. Let's go. That's right, for the second half of Unit 2, we're shifting away from ancient Greece and now looking at ancient Rome, one of the greatest empires the world has ever seen. After the death of Alexander the Great, the Macedonian Hellenistic Empire was divided into three separate empires that dominated most of what is now the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. And thanks to Hellenism, Greek culture spread throughout the world, specifically to Italy, an area that had remained relatively untouched by most of the events in world history thus far. Italy is an interesting area. It's a boot-shaped peninsula that, to this point, had been ruled by one of two groups, either the Etruscans, who were very warlike and tribal, and the Latins, who had migrated from the Middle East. We think they might have some Greek connections. Again, Rome was in a strategic location. Not only did it have flat lands that were great for farming, it also jutted directly into the Mediterranean Sea, the center of the known world at this point in time. And as we saw with Alexander the Great, control of the Mediterranean Sea set up a nation for success. And with that context in mind, we can dive into the founding of the city and the empire of Rome itself. The city itself is known as the City of Seven Hills. Built on the Tiber River and 7 individual hills, it was very defendable and quickly became the center of Roman culture. Yet Romans believed it was founded a little bit differently. Roman mythology holds that Romulus and Remus, 2 boys who were abandoned by the gods, were raised by a wolf and later returned and built up the city of Rome, named after Romulus. Regardless, Rome was built, and it was run by the Latin people, and the phrase Rome was not built in a day is certainly true. It would steadily expand into the power that it would later be recognized as. The early people of Rome made use of Greek advancements such as pillars and columns, and used them to build massive new buildings and structures, including aqueducts that brought fresh water from the mountains to the new growing city. Not only was Rome built on the Tiber River, it now had fresh water coming from the mountains, so Rome could grow at a size that other cities in the past hadn't been able to. And in this way, Rome really does mirror many of the Greek city-states, the polis that we talked about so much already in Unit 2. But what sets Rome apart from everyone else we've talked about is the way they ran their society and the way they governed themselves. Rome was the world's first republic, which meant thing of the people. It's different from Athenian democracy, but it still had some of the same ideas. The purpose of the Roman Republic was simple: to keep one man from having too much power. There was a belief that there needed to be self-sacrifice and duty to the state in order for it to be successful. And that was best done together, not on one's own. The Romans were very cognizant of the fact that absolute power corrupts. Therefore, the Roman Republic was governed by the Senate, an elected body of officials who made decisions for the entire state. The first Senate was officially formed in 509 BC when the Romans officially drove out the Etruscans and took control of the entire Italian peninsula. Now, the representatives for the Senate generally came from the patrician class, the wealthy landowners. See, while the Republic was balanced, it still wasn't necessarily fair. And early on, the plebeians, or the peasants and lower class members, the farmers generally, of Rome, didn't feel like they were accurately represented within the Republic. Yet for the most part, the Republic was successful, and much of that was due to its overall leadership that was in place. Every year, the Senate would elect 2 consuls, representatives from the patrician class who would supervise the economy and the army. Consuls could only serve 1 term and were expected to consult the Senate before making any decisions. This created a system of checks and balances that prevented one man from having too much power while also giving Rome the strong leadership it needed. But the plebeians still felt left out, and because of that, they demanded more rights and participation in government. The Senate responded in two ways. The first was they created a new elected position called the tribune, who was a representative of the plebeians. The tribunes were allowed to veto different votes and therefore change the course of Roman lawmaking in order to better benefit the plebeians. The Senate also created the 12 tables, which listed all of Rome's laws in written form so that all people could understand the laws. These tables were then set up and written down in Rome's Forum, the massive marketplace where all business was done. Despite everything the consuls could do, the tribune was probably the most powerful official in Rome. Not only could he veto or strike down new laws, he also had the support of the plebeians, which was Rome's greatest population. That also included, generally, the military as well. But much like Athens, Rome had a failsafe in place in case there was a time of crisis in which voting couldn't really be done. In Rome, when things went wrong, whether it was an invading army or famine or who knows, Rome had the ability to elect a dictator, a single ruler who had complete and total control to make laws and command the army in time of crisis. And in Rome, the dictator could only have that power for 6 months unless extended by the Senate. Kind of reminds you what happens in Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, when the Chancellor gets emergency powers and builds a clone army and ends up building an empire. I'm getting ahead of myself. The best example of this was in 458 BC when the Roman Senate elected the dictator Cincinnatus, who was simply just a farmer, to fix some of the problems of an ongoing crisis. Under Cincinnatus' leadership, Rome was able to fight off an invading army, and immediately after doing so, Cincinnatus resigned and gave full power back to the Senate. It's truly an example of how the checks and balances of the Roman Republic should work, as well as a great example of servant leadership. But it does make you wonder why, if the point of a republic is to prevent one man from giving too much power, would you ever give one man all of the power? Because if we know anything about people are lazy and jerks. Not everyone's going to be as noble and virtuous as Cincinnatus was. But who knows, maybe they'll never have to give anyone too much power again and it'll all be fine. Or not. Well, we'll get to that later. Rome's system of a republic would be revolutionary for world history, and its ideas of checks and balances have been used since, especially in the United States. But Rome's growing legacy wasn't just the way it governed itself, it was also the way it functioned and the way social life worked. Romans had a very similar religion to that of the Greeks. In fact, their gods are almost exactly the same, just with different names like Mars and Pluto and Juno rather than the traditional Greek names. But the most important part of Roman society was the family itself, the nuclear family. Roman law held that the male was the head of the household. They called this the pater familias, meaning he was in charge of his wife and his kids, and it was his moral duty to grow his kids to be a part of the state, to truly be people of character and good nature. But unlike other parts of the world, Roman women had more of a role. They were independent, they could function on their own, they were often allowed to be a part of business and in some rare cases, even a part of government. Education was a big part of Roman society too, especially in patrician families. Tutors were often hired to educate young boys and girls to grow to be effective participants in the eventual republic. And from an economic standpoint, Rome was successful in farming. It was also successful in using the Mediterranean Sea to its advantage. In fact, they believed that the Mediterranean Sea was inherently theirs. They called it Mare Nostrum, which in Latin means our sea. And quickly Rome builds up not only an agricultural economy, but also one that is based on maritime trade, something the world hasn't really had yet. As Rome continues to grow, not only in wealth, but in population, it becomes clear that this small Italian peninsula is not going to be able to hold this growing state. It's for that reason that Rome begins to expand. See, Romans believe that they have to expand, otherwise they would die. It's a different concept than we've ever seen historically. Rather than just protecting what they had, Romans decided to expand and take from everyone else so that eventually there would be no enemies to attack them. And herein lies the genius of the Roman Empire. Because of their effective military conquest and the techniques that their militaries used, Rome expands from a small city-state on the Italian peninsula to the strongest empire the world has yet seen. Successful expansion outside of Italy was thanks in part to the growth of the Roman legions. Rome's military was far more organized than any other in the world, and in units of 500 men called legions, Rome was able to effectively advance and take out less organized enemies. As the organized Roman war machine continued to expand, it brought with them a system of roads and waterways that now connected Rome to the rest of its growing conquests. And Rome continued to have success, and this was constantly celebrated by the people as it showcased Rome's strength and its honor to its people. When Roman generals and leaders returned from conquests and successful campaigns, they were celebrated with a parade through the Roman Forum, which the Romans called triumphs. Rome's expansion out of Italy and into Europe was relatively unchecked. Nobody was as organized or military-driven as Rome. But Rome had a major rival in the Mediterranean. It was Carthage, a city-state located in modern-day North Africa that was likely settled by the Phoenicians. In order for Rome to dominate the Mediterranean, they had to take out Carthage. What ensued was a series of 3 wars called the Punic Wars, where Rome challenged Carthage for domination in the Mediterranean. The term Punic is a Latin word that refers to Phoenician. There isn't much to talk about with the First Punic War because Rome wipes the floor with Carthage. Rome was just so much more organized and militaristically advanced than Carthage that it was able to gain major territories from Carthage, most notably Sicily and Corsica. But Carthage would come back in the Second Punic War for revenge. The Carthaginian general Hannibal led a massive invasion force that featured hundreds of war elephants by land through France, including a march through the Alps to get to Rome. Rome was taken completely by surprise because they didn't expect Carthage, a mostly naval power, to invade by land. So for the next 15 years, Hannibal and his army would wreak havoc on the Italian peninsula and almost Rome itself. Rome was able to defend itself, however. The city of 7 hills remained in control of itself. And while Carthage continued to batter the gates of Rome, Roman generals sent a separate army to flank Carthage and ended up attacking Carthage itself. Because of that, Hannibal had to leave to try to defend his homeland. While Carthage had so much success in the Second Punic War, Rome was still sort of the winner. So finally, in the Third Punic War, Rome returns to Carthage once again and burns the city to the ground. And once and for all, flexes Rome's military might over Carthage. It is the Third Punic War and the culmination of all 3 Punic Wars that symbolize Rome as now the master of the Mediterranean. Rome ain't just a city anymore. It is becoming an empire. And it now truly dominates the Mediterranean Sea. It truly is Mare Nostrum. It has truly set Rome on the path to the success of an empire unlike anything we've ever seen before. So through it all, we see the success of the Roman Republic and its checks and balances, and the success of the Roman military. And there's so much that I find fascinating about Rome, like the fact that it is truly built on strength and honor, that there was this idea of morality and duty to one's country that many of us admire today. But maybe the coolest thing within ancient Rome is the parallel that it has to our Christian faith. Remember how I mentioned the Roman triumphs that would be had when leaders would return from these massive campaigns successfully? They'd be celebrated in the streets. These triumphs had another name too. The triumphs were also called Gospels. The word itself meant proclamation of victory or celebration of victory. So how cool is it then that 4 books of the Bible are called the Gospels? The life of Jesus Christ is the same as a Roman triumph. Remember, when the New Testament is written, Rome will be in power in the Holy Land and in Israel. So people would be very familiar with Roman culture. They would definitely know what a triumph or what a gospel is. So when this book is written with the title of Gospels, they know exactly what they're expecting. A victory parade. An annunciation of Christ's victory over sin and death. A gospel. How awesome is that? It brings a new gravity to this book and to the events of Jesus Christ. I mean, I hope it was already important for you, but now when you put it in this historical context and you talk about what gospel actually means, wow, that's incredible. So while the Romans had all of this earthly success to celebrate, think about the celebration that's listed in here. We've talked about how this book is an incredible resource because it is a history book. But it's also a guide for our lives. And it's also a proclamation of the victory that Jesus Christ had over sin, death, and the devil for you. That's something to celebrate. Let's party. Meantime, we see this foundation of the Roman Republic and its early growth into the master of the Mediterranean that signals what is to come for Rome. Rome is only going to continue to grow, but as it grows, it's going to face a number of challenges that this small city that it once was never would have dreamed it would have faced. But that's a story for another day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.